So our next speaker is Dr. Nikola Milosevic from Bayer. Nikola, if you'd like to bring up your camera, there you are. I'll just change you to presenter now. So Nikola is a computational scientist for biopharmaceuticals. As a member of the Semantics and Knowledge Graph Technologies team, working on natural language processing, Nikola is a researcher with a computer science PhD in the field of text mining, natural language processing, and machine learning. Also having a master's degree in computer science and 4 years experience in software development, software testing, project management in various industries. Today, Nikola will discuss moving from information retrieval to knowledge graphs, approaches and challenges. So on that, I'll hand you over to you, Nikola, and please, as I remind you again, put all questions in the question box, and we'll bring all of the panelists back at the end for answering questions and a roundtable discussion.
Okay, you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, great.
It's in presentation mode at the moment, so we can see the next slide as well.
So, what about now? Is it better like this?
I mean, it's still the same, but it is very clear if you just want to continue like that.
Okay, whatever. So, yeah, thank you very much. I'll present a little bit of like different perspective, and it's going to be like from the text mining perspective. So like I'm Nikola Milosevic. I work at Bayer at the group called Semantics and Knowledge Graph Technologies, and our main task is basically to develop the methods that can kind of like translate text to knowledge graphs. So our kind of like initial task was kind of like to go from, or our task is basically to go from information retrieval to knowledge graphs. And so in order, like, let's see first, like, what are the differences. So like information retrieval kind of like finds documents containing information that one is looking for. However, this is usually not really kind of like enough, or it could be still quite hard for scientists to like read all the relevant documents. Like literature is kind of like vast, and in order to like find the relationships that they are presented in a document between like various genes, drugs and genes, drugs and diseases, genes and diseases, it can be quite like hard still to read like hundreds of papers. So like the solution is kind of like knowledge graph that actually find, the idea of knowledge graph would be to find you the exact information one is looking for and all the evidence for it and against it in the literature. So in order to do to get to the knowledge graph, especially like once you have kind of like information retrieval system, you need to do like information extraction, you need to do some like abbreviation expansion, you need to like normalize data to be in fair format, so like findable, available, interoperable, and reusable. And then as well, like do the relationship extraction in kind of like as well like fair way, so the relationships are normalized and identifiable. And that is kind of like one of the biggest challenge, and we will go through that. However, as well, like the motivation for knowledge graph is as well like what can we use it for. So this is about like drug discovery. So like one of the kind of like first steps that knowledge graphs can be used is drug target interactions and kind of like identifying compounds, variants, genes, pathways, and so on that are kind of like that the drug can target. And then as well, it can be used for a number of ways across like pharma, and especially if you look at the Bayer as kind of like life science company that has like its pharma division, and then like a consumer health as well as crop science division. it can as well like go through all these kind of like steps that we have around. So it is like diagnostic, healthcare, consumer health, and stuff like that, protection, intervention, biology, chemistry, and as well like breeding, breeding and farming and supply chain, which is kind of like important for our like crop scientists. So this is my team. So like we are a fairly small team of like 4 people. However, we work with a number of like external partners, and our goal is, like our mission statement is that we research and develop technology for generating semantic and fair insights from text-rich data sources for use along the entire R&D value chain within like Bayer. So let's go back to the start and let me present where we are at the moment and like from where we will go as our information retrieval system and like data sources. So maybe you have heard about this like FAIR principle, and especially if you're like around pharma industry, it is like quite important. So like it stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data. And this is kind of like principle that data has to contain in order to be more useful and better managed. So you would need to kind of like data tag with certain metadata such as identifiers, rich metadata, index data repositories, so they're like easily findable, and then like use some standard communication protocol that is as well like open and free, and use authentication where it's necessary. However, like make metadata always available so everybody is aware that the data at least exists, even if they can't access it. And as well, you need to make some sort of like vocabularies available, so the data can be interoperable, match between like different data sets based on some like ontology matching and mapping and stuff like that. So the metadata has to be somehow linked, and as well like it needs to have like usage license and provenance, so you know how like what is the version of the data and so on. So we like based on this like FAIR principle, we developed this Hubble platform, which is our kind of like key knowledge management system, which is storing all public information that we are hosting or licensing from our partners. And we have there like literature, patents, clinical trials, news, expert reports, and so on. And it is this process, it is like name entity recognition is done on the document, as well a lot of various like metadata are extracted from the data, such as authors, journal names, year of publications, and so on. And the data is as well deduplicated, so that you'll see that, for example, we have 125 million abstracts. However, they are coming from 7 data sources, and they're like unique abstracts in each one of them, but a lot of them would be as well duplicated. So it utilizes as well like distributed system, and it is like running on Kafka, so like we can process this data quite fast. It is in the cloud, and it is kind of like foundation for like our information retrieval and trend analysis, as well as NLP pipelines, and as well like we are going towards knowledge graphs. So as well on top of that, we have this like Hubble search, which is like user interface that sits on top of it and presents the data to the users. So user can like search quite complex Boolean queries and get the results that are highlighted, filter them, analyze the trends, and so on. So now like how we move towards knowledge graphs once we have like information retrieval, and that we can use as a base of data for creating the knowledge graph. So knowledge graph are basically the large network of entities that entities have some kind of like semantic types, properties, and they need to have a relationship between them. And they are built on top of like annotating fair data once the relationships are extracted, and it presents like semantic information in context. So it's not like kind of like like in information retrieval where you don't really know what is the context. It's you're just like finding the terms that are present in the document or the entities. Here you have the context of each relationship going on, and you're getting the evidence for each of the relationship that you're pointing in a node in the graph. And then like those data can be utilized for better information gathering, but as well like using for prediction, hypothesis generation, and many more. So challenges are basically making data fair, and one of the things that we realize is that like different use cases require different vocabularies and methodologies. So for example, like for information retrieval, it was quite handy to use like indication where indication vocabulary where we have certain terms such as like contraception drugs for the concept of contraception. So like if somebody is looking for contraceptive drugs, they would probably or if somebody is mentioning contraceptive drugs in the document and somebody searches contraception, then those two will be, then this document will be found. And then as well, there is like problems like what are genes, what are compounds, what are drugs. Like some drugs are compounds, some are as well genes. We have like gene therapies now, and so on. So like how to like properly split those vocabularies and make it appropriate for the use case. And then like there's other tasks like recognizing, normalizing entities. So like we mainly use dictionary-based approaches. So it allows very quick normalization and like adherence to this like their principle. However, it may not find the terms that are outside the dictionaries. So for this, you can use machine learning methods. However, then the issue is with the normalization, so like finding the ID of the entity in the ontology. And obviously, that is kind of like the task for recognizing and normalizing entities. And then we have as well the task of recognizing and normalizing the relationships, which is fairly new field. There is not much of literature, and most of the literature is quite binary in terms of like what types of relationships there are. So usually there's found like there is a relationship or there is not, or there's like very kind of like simplistic view of what a relationship could be. However, for pharma, it is very important to have as detailed and as granular classification of the relationships between concepts as it's possible. However, as well, like not too much. So as well, like we developed this NLP infrastructure that is running on the cloud, and that users can configure these like pipelines that are translated to some JSONs, and they're running on a GitLab, and then it's like translated to the pods on Kafka that are like running in parallel and can process huge amount of data, and those data can be then stored either in like our Hubble or like S3 or some other kind of like elastic index. I mean, and like Kafka works on the topics, so you have like consumers and producers, and each operator is kind of like sitting between them and processes the data in some way. So like one can be tokenizer, the other can be a name entity recognizer, the third could be relationship extractor. And we have developed a number of operators. I'm not gonna go through them all, but yeah, like we have a number of like name entity recognizer as well. Like we are working on relationship extractor. There's like pattern base, and there's as well a number of classifiers. So when it comes to name entity recognition, we are using like both like commercial solution, but as well like we identified one pretty good open source solution that is called Lineaus, and it was developed by my former group at the University of Manchester. It supports multiple formats. It's really fast. It's a dictionary-based method that as well like allows dictionary of regular expressions. However, it didn't have all the features that we needed from it. So we added basically on top of it a number of features, and as well like the whole kind of like idea is that like we have Lineaus as kind of like annotation service, and as well as operator for NLP at scale that can do relationship extraction. An annotation service can be used for various kinds of like documents that are coming on a kind of ad hoc basis. So there's kind of like a wide value chain for the Lineaus. However, as I said, like we have a little bit of issues with like not all features being supported on it by default. So like we extended a bit of like format of the dictionaries, and it like contains like previously it contained like only kind of like IDs and list of synonyms. Now the preferred term and some of the metadata are added. There are like semantic types, and we added a number of like global parameters that could be added to the dictionary, where somebody could say that they want to, for example, ignore cases, ignore diacritics, and so on. And as well, like on the term level, you could use as well like some of the switches, so you can say that you want certain term to be case sensitive, or to be tagged only when some other terms are tagged, and so on. So we tested it. It worked like really well on the dictionaries that had like 50 megabytes, which was like really huge dictionary, kind of like artificially made. And all our dictionaries that we've seen so far, like the biggest one was like less than 20 megabytes, and it could process about like 1,000 abstracts per second. So it was like really fast. However, like not everything can be done with this, and sometimes you need machine learning methods that will like recognize you the terms that are maybe like outside the dictionary, and so you can figure out what needs to be added in a new annotation round. So basically the challenge then is like with the name entity normalization, especially when you need to make kind of like linking between the ontologies and the dictionaries that we have in the ontologies and so on. That ontologies are not really kind of like mapped one-to-one, and they're like, even if you have some kind of like ontologies like SNOMED, and they contain some other ontologies like ICD-10 or READ or OCMIS, SMASH, or so on, the kind of the levels are not the same as, for example, in Medra, if you want to map it to the Medra. So like some entities would come into lower level terms, some would come into higher level terms, and so on. So it is a bit challenging of how to map, and there was as well a challenge that like some terms in ontology would have like two mappings in the other, and one terms would be having another two in the first ontology, and then like sometimes you would have as well like kind of like circular mappings and so on. And like use case of that is that like regulatory and pharmacovigilance would use like often Medra, while diagnostic would use ICD-10 or and as well like ontologies are sparse, so like not all terms and synonyms are included, and there are like morphological variants that would be missing. So like breast cancer, for example, can be said as breast cancer, cancer of breast carcinoma, breast tumor, and so on. So what we figure out that like you could do it with word embeddings and cosine similarity. However, in most of the cases in our vocabulary, we are not dealing with the simple tokens. Like most of the word embeddings are kind of like designed to be with to work with the single terms. So what we did is try to figure out how to make kind of like concept embeddings. So most of the synonyms we kind of like translated to like treat it as a sentences, and then we use basically sentence embeddings. So we use like sentence birth, and then we tried to do similarity between those terms and terms in the ontology, and that worked pretty well. So we quite successfully solved that. And then like next issue would be relationships. And it's like literature is basically a huge repository of current research and knowledge, and it is unstructured and quite hard to query for the people who wanted to find the evidence in it. And it usually contains like more up-to-date information than any structured source. Basically, structured sources are made out of literature most of the time, and there is a lag between when the research comes out and when somebody manages to verify the data and put it in the structured database. And it's kind of like, see, like for us, it seems as like competitive advantage to have this information as fast as it comes out in literature. So we looked at as well like in a number of commercial providers, like what they have on offer in terms of relationship extraction. However, it was a bit difficult to find a solution that would satisfy our need in terms of like to have all the data sources process that we have and all the information that we want to kind of like monitor that they would monitor, and as well like quite often it was hard to integrate between the solutions of external providers, and as well like it kind of like exponentially boosted the costs of such collaborations. So, and as well like data model is quite important in order to like cover future use cases, and that was as well like we found that if we do it internally, we can fine-tune the data model to the best of our needs. So this is like kind of like types of the relationships that we came up with at the moment we are using. And it is kind of like based on the relationship only between drugs, genes, and diseases. So there's like no gene-gene or like protein-protein interaction or drug-drug interaction or kind of like indicative relationship between like disease and disease, which is as well like one of our use cases. Like most of these kind of things we will need to cover in the future as well. Basically, we are looking as well, apart from whether the relationship exists and what type of the relationship is. For gene disease, it is getting like a bit more complicated because we want to look as well on the mode of action. So it's not really kind of like important only like whether the gene is a target to a certain disease, but what kind of like mode of action of that particular gene would have like what kind of causal effect would there be on the disease. So like one gene, like if you inhibit it, it can increase the disease or cause the disease even. And if you activated, it can have like totally opposite effect. So there is like, but it doesn't have to be. So like you really need to find as well like all these mode of actions, and as well like we want to see like whether the relationship is negated or whether there is like speculation of it, like whether the authors of the document are just like thinking there might be some connection between those two entities. Or whether there is kind of like firm evidence in the document that the relationship exists. So this is like our relationship extraction pipeline. So like we use tokenizer, we explode abbreviation, and then like we use lineals to find the entities, and then like extract relationships and store them either on S3 or Elastic. So that kind of like uses a number of like vocabularies, and as well like we are in future looking at how we can do this on the model-based approach. And at the moment, it looks like you find first your entities, and then there is like a number of trigger phrases as that kind of like determines the type of relationship, and there can be like a number of like phrases before, after, and then like at some point as well we have as well the mode of action, for example, for G, and then we look at it as like there is like subject predicate, attribute and trigger word, and you can basically write kind of like the grammars as a kind of like a rule set that will use those kind of like entities like subject, predicate, attribute, and triggers. And then like we developed as well like some kind of like visualization interface that we call Telescope. It's kind of like based on RAT annotation engine. However, it uses like Elastic to like read the data from, and then like you can evaluate and see your relationships. And then like we are like working on these like machine learning based approaches. However, the main issues we are having is that there are not many labeled data sets, and especially if we have this like very kind of like fine-tuned data model, it like none of those labeled data sets that exist, for example, in academia, are really mappable to what we want. So we basically need to create our own data and like work with some partners to like annotate the data for us. And we can basically start using some kind of like concurrence and this like rule-based approach to like speed up annotation, so like to pre-annotate. But however, if you really want a good model, you need gold standard data, and you need some humans some expert humans to review the data. And then it comes to basically classification of the sentences to your data model. So you can replace like the entities with some kind of like key phrases like subject and predicate. You can leverage attention and embeddings as kind of like modern NLP approaches, so you can use BERT. And then like as well, you can classify mode of action, classify speculability, so like whether the authors are speculating. And then like extraction is practically the easiest part, where you just need to figure out whether there is negation word and whether it is in the place that kind of like affects the relationship. So in terms of the takeaway, basically the making data fair is the first step that enables both information retrieval and further like downstream creation of the knowledge graph. And then like once you have the data in a fair format, you can do information retrieval easily. However, you can do on top of that further text mining and then like work up your way to the knowledge graph. there is this like question of the task optimization, and so basically, as you fine-tune your models and your like vocabularies, dictionaries, ontologies towards certain tasks, it may produce like some challenging further down the line once you want to move to other areas. So like, for example, these like ontologies that we use for information retrieval produce some challenges later on for knowledge graph mapping. Yeah, like knowledge graph have kind of novel paradigm, or like especially in computer science, of this concept that you can trace back to Aristotle and especially Kant. But yeah, like in computer science, it's kind of like fairly new and novel, and it is like no more about like looking for the relevant document, it's looking for the relevant evidence and counter evidence. So like, and then doing the inference on top of that and trying to make actually hypotheses out of the graph. And then like, yeah, like we try to model this like biological relationship and obtain more data for like machine learning approach, which is like still kind of like major challenge for us, especially when we are going beyond name entity recognition. So yeah, that's all for me. Thank you very much. This is a small snapshot of our graph so far, and or data model for a graph and the relationships that should exist between them. So yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nikola. A very interesting talk there on extracting data, particularly of NLP for use in building knowledge graphs. Obviously, something at Biorelate that we have been working on and really resolving for the last 7 years or so.